Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to another video. In this video, I'm giving you guys a review of M. Night Shyamalan's new movie, Old. This is going to be a spoiler-free review, so if you haven't already seen this movie, I'm going to be going over the good, the bad, and giving you guys my final take. But before we get into this spoiler-free review, if you guys are new in here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn notification on so you don't miss any time I upload a new video or go live. Both wasting more time. Let's get into it. Starting off with the good of this movie, I think the first thing I have to mention is the acting. I don't think the acting was anything crazy from any of the other characters, but Alex Wolff's acting, he definitely carried the acting side of the movie. I will say the mom and the dad, the people who played those two characters, they were also really well done. There's a few other characters, I forgot their names, and I also technically can't mention them because I would be spoiling the movie, but a lot of the acting in this movie was good. I would just say Alex Wolff's acting just stood out a lot more to me. I thought his character had a lot of depth. I think as time went on, I think Alex Wolff's character really carried this movie just because of the emotion that was portrayed. That the kid was Alex Wolff's like character's age, like, because there's basically like a few different actors, because obviously as people age there's different actors that play them. So the final two actors who played the character of Alex, I forgot the name of the character, I'm sorry, these character names were so generic and forgettable. I honestly didn't even care for the character names. But yeah, moving on, I thought Alex Wolff and the guy who played the same character but older, I thought those two were really well done. The acting overall, no one's performance is bad. I'll definitely say that. I don't think any performance was bad by far, but I just think Alex Wolff's acting stood out the most. But yeah, moving on, I think the final act also carried this movie overall, not just acting wise. I think overall the movie was carried by its final act. The first two acts were pretty mid, which I'll talk about later, but I definitely felt like the final act was phenomenal. Again, it carried the movie. The suspense in this final act was so well done. I think that after a climax in the second act, the middle act, I think the third act really did a good job of basically plateauing it while still increasing the tension at the same time. The story felt like it was at a standstill, but the tension was just still rising, which I'm still confused on how M. Night Shyamalan did that, but he did it. I love the final act so much. It's just really a shame because the final act of this movie is so good, and with just a little bit better of build-up acts, I think this movie could have been honestly perfect. But again, I'll talk about the first two acts later on in this video. I think the execution in the final act for the explanation of whatever was happening, like the beach that turns people old, the explanation as to why it's happening, all the background reasons that I can't mention because this is a spoiler for review, obviously. All those background reasons are well executed in my opinion. The explanation is super well done. I don't necessarily like the reasoning. I don't think it's the best reasoning. I thought it was kind of a cop out, I guess, but I do think the way it was executed was really well done. It could have been executed very poorly, since I personally don't think the reason is the best, but I think they executed it well enough for me not to be mad at it. Also, the torment and thrill in this final act is insane. Personally, I think that again, like I said before, the final act carries, but it also carries in terms of kind of scare level. We don't really have any crazy scares in the first two acts. We have a few in the second act as stuff starts to build up, but the first act we really get no crazy scares. The second act we got a few, but the third act really took it. It really felt like it was embracing itself as a horror movie, because that's kind of what you would expect. These are just a bunch of old people that are aging really fast. They're getting old really fast. They don't know what's happening to their body. That's very scary to me, and I don't understand how they didn't embrace horror aspects more, but they did it enough in the third act for me to love it. Also, the premise was super well executed. I think the whole premise of turning old on a beach that you can't escape, that is a crazy premise, but I didn't really like how they spoon-fed us information, which again I'll get to when I talk about the bad of the movie. But I think it was always like mysterious, but not always captivating, if that makes sense. Like, it always felt like there was some looming threats, like you can't escape. Even while they're struggling with other things, you always feel like, oh, like, why don't they just get off the island? Because they can't, they're trapped. You always feel that, and they always try to reiterate that one point is like they cannot leave, which is I love to see. But when I say it's not captivating, I mean, like, I'm not really invested in these characters other than Alex Wolff's character. That's really the only character I have an emotional attachment to, and even that character I don't really have a crazy emotional attachment to. I only do because its acting is way more emotional than the others. But overall, I would just say I'm not invested in the story of these people, and that's why it's not captivating. I'll also say it's not always predictable. I think after a certain point, you can obviously predict the ending, you can predict the twist. It's no split level or glass level twist, but I definitely think that this movie is fun when it comes to the predictability, because it's not always predictable in the first two acts. You feel like there's any direction that this movie could go in, but after a certain point, it does get very very, very predictable, which does suck. But for most of the movie, it's a great mystery, and that's what I really enjoyed about it. But now I want to talk about what I didn't necessarily enjoy. I want to talk about the bad of the movie. Now, like I mentioned before, the first 2 acts of this movie just honestly weren't my thing. In my opinion, I could just honestly call them pretty, like, I could probably call them pretty mid. I didn't enjoy them at all. I honestly feel like I could fall asleep. The camera work really just felt like it took away from the movie itself. If like they literally, like, they move the camera to certain places and you could just hear the audio of people screaming or yelling, and you could just hear certain things, but you couldn't see it because they had to kind of push for that PG-13 rating and they couldn't make it rated R, probably for money purposes, I'm guessing. But honestly, that just really took away from the movie. It really didn't, like, it didn't let me experience the emotions that these characters are feeling. And like I said before, that's one thing that I had a problem with. I wasn't captivated into the movie. I didn't have any emotions towards these characters, and I think the camera work is one of those reasons. Also, there were a lot of one shots, so basically it would like focus on the character, it like go off into the distance, show the beach, and then it'd come right back, and there wouldn't be any cuts. But I just don't understand it. And nothing with the characters would change. There's a few shots where the characters change after the camera pans away. That's cool. I love that. Just showing time passing in one camera movement. That's great camera work. But when you move the camera away and come back in and it doesn't change anything, it doesn't really make sense to me. It feels just kind of like a way to like push away like other kind of stuff. Also, the pacing in the first 2 acts was absolutely horrendous. I honestly couldn't tell what was the first and second act until the very end of the movie when everything was complete. Everything just felt so weird. Like in the beginning, in the first act, or at least what I identify as the first act, it just felt like everything was thrown at us. And then the beginning of the second act / the end of the first act, it really felt like they were just speed fooding us information because they rushed so much in the beginning and you didn't get a good time to explain it. They just like spoon fed us all the information, like, okay, this is what happens on the beach. This is like your cranial stuff. Like, this is why you're feeling all this stuff in your mind. This is why we're growing. This is how time works here. Like, it feels too spoon fed to us. And it feels like M. Night Shyamalan just thinks we're dumb. I feel like they could have just had a better way to implement all of these, I guess, rules you could call them, or just exploring the beach. Like, you should have spent more time on that instead of just randomly throwing us into these stupid situations that really have no effect later on in the movie. Now, I want to talk about potentially the worst thing in this movie, which was the twist. Now, I'm going to admit, in the beginning of the movie, I felt like I didn't know what the twist was, but then there's this one scene, and they make this one thing so prominent that I'm like, it has to come back at the end of the movie. It just had, like, there's no way that they spend this much time. There's no way that they spend this much time with the camera on this one thing that it doesn't come into play again later in this movie. And it was exactly what I thought. It's cool. It makes sense. It's a cool callback, whatever, to save whatever people. I'm not going to spoil anything, but I do not like it. It's so predictable. It just felt like a cop out in my opinion. Like I mentioned before, it just doesn't feel like a normal. I feel like we all expect M. Night Shyamalan to have twists, right? I feel like we all expect that from his movies now. And you just have to top it every time. This one didn't really do much for me. It was predictable, it was classic, and it was just honestly boring, especially in the midst of the movie where everything was so fast-paced towards the end. It kind of broke the tension, I guess you could say, because it was so predictable. So my final take for this movie is that the premise of this movie promises more than it can deliver. This isn't by far Shyamalan's worst movie, but it isn't near his best either. Alex Wolff carries when it comes to the performances, and this movie was definitely hindered by the PG-13 rating. The pacing was god-awful, and for most parts of this movie, it was pretty uninteresting until the final act. Overall, I'm going to give this movie a 7 out of 10. I honestly don't think you need to go to theaters for this one. You should just wait till you can watch it at home. I don't think it's anything to go out of your way to watch, but it's still a pretty fun watch. If you've already seen Old, let me know what you thought of it in the comments down below. If you haven't already seen Old, let me know what you're expecting from this movie now that you've seen this review in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Peace.